So another update on this Riley Brooklands replica I'm trying to build. Progress is very slow, but there is progress happening. So the gearbox is all assembled there. I have all these engine covers off and out because I wanted to clean them up, and I started looking into vapor blasting, and it turns out there's a guy local to me, very local, 2 streets down, who can vapor blast these, which, if I understand it correctly, is kind of like sandblasting, but the sand is mixed with water and blasted out at high pressure. So it's a lot less aggressive, but it cleans things up really well. All these sort of aluminium castings and things. So I'm going to get him to have a look at doing that for me. And I've been fiddling with the gearbox still. I've got the correct throw-up bearing housing now. That's in there. You can sort of see how these arms have little pins on them that engage in that. And then this slides backwards and forwards on these pins. And inside here there'll be a release bearing, and that bearing, when you push the clutch in, that moves that back like that, which is what disengages the clutch. It's a bit hard to see without the rest of the clutch there. The clutch pressure, the sliding plate, I still need to get. I've got a contact who hopefully has a second-hand one of those I can buy. And at the moment the flywheel is off being lightened, and the steering column is off being shortened as well, because in the Brooklands, you're so low down and the steering column is at such a low angle. If you try to use a standard one, which is this one here, it's too long, and the steering wheel is far too close to your chest. So I've been advised by the experts in the UK who build these cars and build replicas of them to have this shortened. So this is being shortened by 5.5 inches, just to give a little bit more clearance and make it easier to get in and out of the car. So that's off being shortened now. You can see I've cleaned up the casing for it, and I cleaned up and zinc plated the bolts that hold it all together, along with the release bearing. I got from the UK a second-hand drop arm, which is good because that's one of the pieces I was missing. Drop arm goes onto the steering box there, so when you turn the steering wheel, that goes forwards and backwards. I'm guessing that way around, I'm not quite sure. So that moves forwards and backwards. And then I need to get the drag link, which is the piece that goes from that steering arm forwards to the stub axle, which will be up there. Obviously that'll be mounted underneath on the springs. So that's kind of all happening. Now with the clutch, what I've been told is well, one, this is the shaft that moves that bearing in and out. You can see this sort of engages in here. There's a bar across here that this engages on, and this shaft is splined. So this piece goes on here. This is actually the wrong piece. There's another style of this where the bolt is on this left-hand side, which is what I need, because if you look at this, obviously it hits the gearbox casing. There's not much travel there. So I have got another one of these, a spare one, which I may modify, or else I can try and get the correct part. But on a saloon car, you've got the shaft at the bottom here, and this is the pedal. This would be the clutch pedal. Way too big for a Brooklands. But you can see there's a pin here, and there's a rod that goes up, so that when you push the clutch in, that'll move this up and down. Now I've been told that on a real Brooklands, the clutch pedal is pinned to the shaft. So when you press the clutch pedal in, this whole shaft moves, and the linkage is actually on this side. So there would be a little arm here coming up to an arm up here. Now, I could do that. You'd think you could just turn the shaft around, but you can't, because it's two different diameters. Because it's splined in the middle here, this section is a bigger diameter than this section. So if I was to try and turn the shaft around and put it in, instead of going in from that side, I would have to bore this hole out to fit this diameter and then sleeve this side, which I'm not sure I really want to do that. Now, the interesting thing is I was looking back at the pictures of the original Brooklands that I'm more or less using as a reference. That was 8075. And that car has the linkage here. But it also looks like the pedals on that car have definitely been modified. And that car was raced in New Zealand back in the day. So God knows what modifications have been made to it. I know all sorts of hacks have been done to it. So it's probably not original, but obviously it worked. So maybe what I'll end up doing is the same. I'll just make this so it works, which may mean getting the correct one of these or modifying the spare of this so that the bolt's on this side, and then making up the linkage there for the clutch pedal, and then shortening the pedal. Or one of my parts guys in the UK does have proper pedals that he's supposed to be sending me, so I'll wait until all that arrives and then worry about how I'm going to do that. Again, with these cars and these replicas, a lot of the time it's just making it work with what you've got. So I'm sure I can make it work. The other thing I've been doing is I've ground in the valves. The engine was all rebuilt, so they didn't need much. They just needed a light grind. But I'm now just testing them. I'm doing a leak test. So the head has the valves have the springs all attached, and the spark plugs are in just to block the holes. And basically I filled the chambers up with kerosene, and I've left it there, a good hour and a half now, and I'm checking to see if there are any leaks, and there are slight leaks. This one is a very, very slow leak. These ones are okay. You can see I broke the tension there, and the kerosene's leaked out, and it smells. And a couple on this side are also leaking. So I'm going to have to regrind those valves in. They probably don't need much. I was trying to do as little as possible. I don't want to grind them down too far. So what that means is I now have to get the kerosene out of it, obviously, and then remove the springs and just regrind in those valves a little bit more, just to see if I can stop them leaking. Getting the springs in and out is a bit tricky. I'll get this cleaned up and I'll show you how I do it. So this is how I go about getting the valve springs on. In the manual, what they show is you build yourself a wooden board with little square blocks on it to sit the head on, and the wooden blocks fit in here to stop the valves pushing in. And then what they suggest is you just use a big screwdriver and push the spring down, and then get the little keeper in place. Now, maybe they were stronger back then, I'm not sure, or maybe it's because it was only single valve springs, but I've got double valve springs on this head, and so it's really hard to compress the springs. So what I've done is, using a modern spring compressor, I made up the little wooden board, and it's got this little angle on it, and I found I can get the spring compressor across the head, and there's enough depth here that you can get to the second valve down. Obviously when you do the other side, you flip the head over and you come at it from the other angle, and as long as you do it in the correct order and get the middle two in first, then you can do the outer two. I find this works quite well. So what I actually do is I clamp it down, and then I use the screw thread to compress the spring, and then you can drop out the little steel keeper thing here. So the end of the valve has a slot in it, and it actually goes through the slot and just sits in place. There's a little cup here. So now what I can do is, might be a bit dodgy doing this with one hand, but loosen off the tension on the screw, and then I can remove that. This is the little keeper cup thing that goes on the end, Obviously that fits in there like that. You can tell this is fairly old. You can see the little indentations where the little slotted bar has been sitting in the past. So now I can remove those springs and I can pull that valve out if I need to. Unfortunately, this isn't one of the ones that's leaking, so to get to the leaking ones, I need to drop these, get this one out as well. So I'm going to go and do that now and fix all this up. This just shows how the compressor is positioned just to get to the second valve down. So you can see why the order is important, because if you do this top one first, there's no room for the spring compressor. It'll hit that first valve. You know, I've already pulled the pin out of this one, so I'm going to go ahead and regrind these in. It's now actually a few days later from when I ground the valves into the head. Since then I leak tested it and it held up fine, and I cleaned it up and gave it a paint. I've been using this Duplicolor engine enamel paint with ceramic apparently. So it's a low gloss black. This stuff seems pretty good actually. This is the first time I've used it, and what I've found is if you actually bake it on, it doesn't say that you need to, but being an engine enamel, generally these things it helps harden them when the engine's running. The heat bakes the paint on, so I generally bake the paint on in my little toaster oven, or for this one I actually used my actual oven. I did have to be careful doing that because of course everything was oily and greasy, so there was quite a bit of smoke, and I did manage to set off the smoke detector at one point. But once it all cooled down, everything was fine. It's come out quite well. One thing that is puzzling me a little is I did buy new spark plugs for this. So these plugs come in these little boxes, of course. AP5FS. I do find it curious that the spark plugs come in little rectangular boxes, not square boxes, given that the plugs themselves are round. I don't know why they do that. But the thing that's actually puzzling me is these spark plugs don't seem to have a sealing washer. There's actually a little taper on the bottom there. So how they're going to seal in here, I don't really know, especially given this is an old head, and you can see where around the top of the threads it's broken off a little bit. That's not going to affect the plug holding in, but I don't understand how it'll seal. So I don't know if people add copper washers there, or they just screw them in and hope for the best. I don't really know. Also notice these are 18mm plugs, not the usual 14s, which seem common in most cars these days. So apart from the head, I have also completely degreased and cleaned the block, and I actually now, it had a little bit of surface rust on it, and to get rid of that I'm trying something else that I've never used before, which is this Evapo-rust gel rust remover. They call it a gel. It's actually really, really thick stuff. It's more like snot, basically. So this is only a little 500 gram jar, I guess, 500 milliliter jar, and it took almost none to do the block here. And I just want to get rid of the surface rust, so I'll leave that on there for a couple of hours as the instructions say, and then I'll wash it off, and then I'm going to paint the whole thing with that semi-gloss, low gloss black, same as the head. I quite like that black actually. It's not like a flat black, but it's not a gloss black. It's sort of just a good engine color. I've also recently got, you can see these have all been cleaned up. This engine was rebuilt and never run, and you can still actually see the the honing marks inside the cylinders. But I have got hold of one of these ball hones, and I'll just give it a really light, quick go over when the time comes. I can't do any of that yet because, of course, I need the clutch, because I need the clutch done so I can get all the rotating parts balanced before I can start reassembling the engine. That could be tricky now because, of course, we're all in lockdown here. So in New Zealand, for the next month, next 4 weeks, basically it's in severe lockdown. So all non-essential shops are shut. You're not supposed to travel. You're not supposed to have contact with people. And this is basically the entire country is just effectively shut down. So I'm quite enjoying it. I'm trapped here in my little garage, and I've got lots of things to do, so I'm not too worried. The other little job I've been working on is the carburetors and getting those sorted out. So these are the carbs I got from Horopito Motors for, I think it was $60 each. They're not quite right. The correct carbs would be OM carbs, which are also actually a little bit bigger. These are 1-inch UBAs, I think they're called. I can't remember the actual name of them. They're a bit odd, but they were used on old Morris 8s. So the manifold that I've got was already modified to fit these carbs. So they've just bolted straight onto there. So I'm just using what I've got, basically. Eventually I can try and find better ones, but the car will run on these. They may be a little bit small, but it will work. So I've completely rebuilt those. And for the different linkages and things, I'm actually using the linkages here, which are pinned to the shaft, as the fixing for the throttle return springs. And the two shafts are linked together with the little joiner there. And I've got the actual throttle actuating linkage on the end here. And because this overhangs by quite a bit, it was actually bending this, and it would put an awful lot of load on this bush in here in the carburetor. So to fix that, I made this little thing. It's a little plate that bolts onto the end, and there's a sort of boss here with a hole drilled in it that the end of the shaft is actually sitting in, and that takes off the strain on the shaft when this lever's going up and down. There's a small hole drilled in it, just so you can put a drop of oil in there. Having the mill actually makes doing stuff like this a lot easier. So things like drilling the hole in the end there, you can do it all manually, of course. It's not a problem, but to get it all really accurate, it helps having a lathe and mill and that kind of thing. This is just a little ball end which came on one of the carbs. So obviously that opens and shuts like that. These springs were zinc colored, zinc plated, and I used a little bit of gun bluing stuff just to blacken them up, and they work quite well. And I also machined up the little bolts here to make the little attachment point for the spring. So that's all pretty solid. I also got from China the right fittings for the banjos here, and I just made up this little pipe which had to have a very slight kink in it just to clear the choke lever. And for the choke lever, I couldn't figure out a nice bracket that I can mount on this to operate the choke cable. So what I will do is I'll make a little piece that actually fits over this, and the choke cable will have a little ball end which will go through that piece, and that'll have to be mounted somewhere else on the car. I haven't figured out where yet. I think that'll become clear when I actually build it. I also made this bracket to give me somewhere to attach the throttle return springs to. Chances are when I assemble all this, I'll find that it all fouls with something, probably the steering box, but we'll see. It was just more an excuse to be fiddling with something and building something. I'm quite pleased with how that's come out. So with everything in lockdown, I'm not really sure that I'll be able to get any more parts and things. So really, I should be working on finishing the little Austin there. I think I've got everything I need here to be able to work on that now and actually get it done. So that should really be my main focus now.